There is a very specific, almost universally recognized feeling of modern digital life.
Oh, yeah. We all know it.
Right. You walk into a room, or rather, you navigate to a web page with a clear, singular purpose. You have a mission.
Exactly. You're trying to accomplish something specific.
You are there to read an in-depth article you just found, or you're there to, finally pull the trigger and buy that specific pair of running shoes.
Or maybe you're literally just trying to find the hours of operation for a local bakery so you can grab a coffee before they close.
Yes. So you cross the digital threshold, your eyes start scanning the screen to find exactly what you need, and then right as your brain locks onto the target, bam.
The lights go dim.
The lights go completely dim. The content you actively wanted is suddenly held hostage behind this translucent gray veil.
And a shiny, meticulously designed white box jumps right into the middle of your vision.
Aggressively demanding your email address in exchange for like a 10% discount you never even asked for.
It is the digital equivalent of a jump scare in a horror movie.
That is exactly what it is.
But instead of a monster, it's a marketing team. It's abrupt. It's inherently disorienting, and it completely derails whatever cognitive momentum you had painstakingly built up to that point.
It totally derails you. And whether you are a junior designer who is just starting out and trying to figure out how to build these interfaces without hating yourself,
right?
Or, a developer prepping for a UI meeting where you're going to have to argue with a marketing director about conversion rates.
Which is never a fun meeting.
Never. Or honestly, even if you are just someone listening to this right now who is insanely curious about why certain websites seem meticulously, deliberately designed to drive you absolutely crazy.
You have felt this precise frustration.
You know this feeling. And today, we are going to completely change how you browse the internet. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Our mission today is a highly focused one. We are unpacking a masterclass in digital architecture, specifically zeroing in on Chapter 18.
Titled Modals and Popups.
Right, from the comprehensive guidebook Design User Interface.
And as we navigate through these concepts today, I have laid out a rather extensive spread of materials in front of me.
You really do. It looks like a war room in here.
It is. I'm looking at architectural blueprints of digital spaces, heat maps tracking where human eyes naturally fall on a screen.
Which is fascinating, by the way.
It really is. And I've got wireframe schematics of what we call top-level prompts.
Top-level prompts.
Yes. These are the layers of a digital ecosystem that sit entirely above the core interface you are actually trying to use.
Okay, let's unpack this because, and this is my catchphrase, why do we build things we hate to use?
It's the ultimate paradox in our field.
Right out of the gate, there is this massive glaring contradiction in our source material.
Oh, absolutely.
We are going to spend this entire deep dive dissecting the exact pixel measurements, the perfect mathematical drop shadows, and the precise linguistic rules of building pop-ups, overlays, and action sheets.
We're getting into the microscopic details.
But the text explicitly, unambiguously states that using any of these modules should be an absolute last resort.
It doesn't sugarcoat it at all.
No. It flat out acknowledges that they are extremely frustrating for users. So why on earth are we learning the microscopic anatomy of something we fundamentally despise interacting with?
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychology of interruption and how that conflicts with the ultimate goal of design.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, as designers, our primary objective is usually to facilitate a seamless flow. Flow state is this psychological concept where the user is moving effortlessly from point A to point B.
Like when you're just lost in an app and everything just works.
Exactly. They aren't thinking about the mouse, they aren't thinking about the screen, they're just effortlessly interacting with the content.
Right.
But there are very specific moments in a complex digital ecosystem where the system absolutely must halt the user.
So the author calls them a last resort because
they are inherently violent to the user's attention. They force you to completely stop what you are doing, abandon your current cognitive thread, and deal with a brand new, prioritized layer of information.
You are literally taking their agency away, just temporarily.
Exactly. We only use these tools when the risk of the user not seeing the information is significantly worse than the frustration of the interruption itself.
I am trying to wrap my head around a scenario where interrupting someone is actually doing them a favor.
Think about a physical building.
Oh, I guess it's kind of like a fire alarm in a commercial office.
That's a perfect analogy.
If you are sitting down deep in thought, trying to finalize a massive spreadsheet, a fire alarm going off is incredibly annoying.
It shatters your concentration completely.
It's loud, it's obnoxious, but if there is an actual emergency, like the building is literally on fire, or, I guess in a digital sense, a critical failure in the software.
Or a strict confirmation where a user is about to permanently delete their entire account history.
Right. You need that alarm. You need them to stop looking at the spreadsheets and pay attention to the flashing lights before they make a terrible mistake.
You absolutely do not use a building's fire alarm to announce that someone brought donuts into the break room.
Oh man, but so many websites do exactly that.
They do. But you are supposed to reserve it for critical, irreversible actions or mandatory systemic warnings. And Chapter 18 categorizes these digital fire alarms into 3 very distinct modules.
Okay, let's list those out.
Each one is tailored for specific environments and specific types of cognitive interruptions. We have pop-ups, overlays, and action sheets.
Let's clearly define where these 3 live before we start tearing them apart. The breakdown suggests that pop-ups, which are the classic centered boxes we all know and loathe, work best on desktop environments.
Right, because there's plenty of screen real estate there.
Overlays are described as pretty universal, functioning well across various devices and screen sizes. And action sheets are almost entirely a mobile-specific pattern.
Yes, very specific to holding a phone in your hand.
Let's start our deep dive by looking at the pop-up, because it is definitively the most ubiquitous, and I would argue the most aggressively abused of these tools.
I wouldn't argue with that at all.
To understand why they fail so spectacularly on most websites, we first have to dissect the anatomy of a perfect pop-up. We need to establish a baseline of good design. What actually constitutes a pop-up structurally?
Well, a standard pop-up is not just a random box. It requires a very strict hierarchical anatomy to function without causing total user paralysis.
Total user paralysis, I love that term.
First, it must be a self-contained window featuring a clear title. This title must immediately state the explicit purpose of the interruption.
So no clickbait titles.
No. Below the title, it can optionally feature a description, but only if the title itself isn't completely sufficient to explain the context.
Okay, so keep it brief.
Crucially, moving down the hierarchy, it must feature at least one primary button for the user to take a decisive action.
And then the most important part.
The escape row. An X icon specifically located in the top right corner to close the window.
Always the top right.
Almost always. Furthermore, a foundational rule of a true pop-up is that clicking or tapping anywhere outside the window itself in that darkened background area must also trigger the exact same result as the X.
It has to dismiss the pop-up.
It absolutely must dismiss the pop-up.
Wait, I noticed a very specific rule here that I found a bit confusing at first glance. I'll call it the double close rule.
Ah, yes, the redundancy rule.
The text states that when the only action available to the user is to close the pop-up. Let's say it's just a simple success notification that says, profile updated successfully. You must always provide both the X in the top right corner and a dedicated button at the bottom that also says close.
Yes, both of them.
Why demand that kind of redundancy if I already have an X in the corner and I can also just click the background? Why do I need a giant button at the bottom that does the exact same thing? Doesn't that just clutter the UI?
That is a very common pushback from minimalist designers, but it fundamentally misunderstands cognitive load and, frankly, varying levels of user accessibility. You have to remember that we have trained users to look for different escape hatches depending on their personal comfort level with technology. A power user, someone who spends 12 hours a day on a computer, might instinctively dart their cursor to the top right X before the pop-up has even fully animated onto the screen.
That's me. I'm hitting that X instantly.
Or they might just blindly click the dark space outside the box. But many users, perhaps older demographics or those less comfortable with abstract UI patterns, rely on traditional reading mechanics.
Right, they read top to bottom.
Exactly. They read the title, they read your brief description, and their eyes naturally continue to follow gravity down to the bottom of the module.
Oh, I see.
If their eyes reach the bottom of that box and there is no clear, explicit path forward, no button telling them how to acknowledge the information they just spent time reading, they experience a micro moment of confusion.
They have to consciously stop, look around.
They have to stop, backtrack their eye movement, and consciously search the perimeter for an X.
Which feels like work.
It is work. By providing the explicit close button directly in their downward reading path alongside the structural X at the top, you are simultaneously catering to both the learned, rapid UI patterns of the power user and the natural, linear reading flow of the human eye.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. because designing the physical box of the pop-up is clearly only half the battle. A massive portion of the strategy in Chapter 18 doesn't actually focus on the box itself, but rather on the empty space around the box.
The background overlay.
Right. The text introduces a very specific concept, the 70% rule. It dictates that in order to improve the readability of the pop-up and force the user's attention, you have to darken the background underneath it.
It creates focus.
But it doesn't just say make it dark, it gets mathematically precise. It suggests using a deeply dark hue, like full absolute black, which in hex code is hashtag 000000, or a very dark saturated shade of your primary brand color.
And setting the opacity of that color to exactly 70 to 80%.
Yes. And this is where the psychology of digital spatial awareness becomes paramount.
When a pop-up appears and halts the user, we absolutely want to command their immediate attention, but we desperately want to avoid inducing panic or digital amnesia.
Digital amnesia, I love that.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of user experience, we have to ask ourselves about the extremes.
Right. If the goal is absolute focus on the pop-up, why not just go to 100% opacity? Why not just make the background completely pitch black so they literally cannot see anything else but the white box?
Because of the psychological reaction to total loss of context. Have you ever clicked a link on a familiar website and suddenly the entire screen goes completely black and a solitary white box appears asking for your credit card or email?
Yes. It feels like I've been kidnapped.
It does.
My immediate visceral reaction is that I've been secretly redirected to a scam site, or I've accidentally clicked a malicious ad. I lose all bearing of where I was a second ago.
Exactly. The 70% opacity mandate isn't just an arbitrary aesthetic choice made by a trendy designer. It is a vital psychological tether.
A tether to reality.
By keeping the screen underneath slightly visible through that darkened veil, the user retains their spatial context.
The guidelines specifically note that having it slightly transparent allows the user to still be able to discern the context of the entire screen behind the interruption.
They implicitly understand, without having to actively think about it, that they haven't navigated away from your page. A layer has simply been placed on top.
So they can still see the blurred outlines of the article they were halfway through reading.
Or the faint shape of the running shoes they were about to add to their cart. This visual reassurance subconsciously tells them, don't panic, you're still in the right place.
As soon as you deal with this prompt, your original objective is right there waiting for you. It's remarkably similar to dimming the lights in a movie theater. The movie screen is the absolute focus, it's the brightest thing in the room, but they don't turn the room into a pitch black sensory deprivation chamber.
Right, you can still see the faintly growing exit signs.
You can see the silhouette of the seats in front of you, and because of that peripheral context, you feel safe and grounded.
That's a great way to think about it.
And to push that layered feeling even further, there is another subtle visual trick mentioned: drop shadows. The text states that the shadow shows that our pop-up is a top layer, and the rest of the interface is underneath.
We have to remember that a digital screen is inherently a flat, two-dimensional piece of glass. Our brains know this.
Right.
So to communicate that one digital object is above another, we have to borrow physics from the real world. A subtle drop shadow creates an illusion of depth. It implies a z-axis.
It tells the human visual cortex that the pop-up is physically hovering closer to their eye than the web page itself.
This visual hierarchy unconsciously reinforces the priority. It says, this hovering object requires immediate attention before you can reach past it to interact with the layer sitting behind it.
So we have built the perfect stage. We have our slightly transparent dark background to keep them grounded. We have our beautifully shadowed white box hovering in the foreground, and we have our clear title and description.
The stage is set.
But seeing the pop-up is one thing. The user actually has to interact with it to get rid of it. Which brings us to what might be the most dangerous, highly weaponized element in all of UI design.
The X button.
The X button.
The geometry of frustration. It is incredible how much user anger can be traced back to a few dozen pixels.
The design principles don't just gently suggest making sure there is an X somewhere on the screen. They provide exact, unyielding mathematical rules for the physical interaction with that specific icon.
Yes, and they are critical.
I was blown away by the precision here. It introduces the concept of the clickable area, also known as the active hitbox.
The invisible design.
Right. It specifies that the actual digital space the computer recognizes as a click must be significantly larger than the visual X that the user's eye sees. and it gives hard baseline numbers.
It does.
For a mobile device, that active invisible square needs to be at least 44 by 44 points. For a desktop environment where you have a mouse, it needs to be at least 32 by 32 points.
To truly understand the necessity of those specific numbers, we have to look away from the screen and look at the realities of human biology and physical hardware.
Okay, lay it on me.
On a desktop computer, you are manipulating a physical mouse on a desk to move a tiny, pixel-perfect cursor on a screen. It utilizes fine motor skills.
Right, you can be very precise.
But on a mobile phone, the interaction model is completely different. You're using your thumb. Compared to a razor-sharp mouse pointer, the human thumb is essentially a blunt instrument.
It really is. We're just mashing the glass.
In the early days of mobile design, Apple's Human Interface Guidelines conducted extensive ergonomic research and established the 44 by 44 point rule.
Why that exact number?
Because on an average mobile screen, that mathematical dimension translates roughly to 7 to 9 millimeters of physical glass. And 7 to 9 millimeters happens to be the exact average surface area of a human finger tap.
Wow, okay, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
Because if the science says the active area absolutely needs to be 44 by 44 points so a thumb can hit it, why not just draw a massive, thick, ugly visual X that takes up exactly that much space?
I've seen sites that do that.
Right. Why are we playing this game of having a small, elegant visual X surrounded by a larger invisible hitbox? If the entire point is that we need them to be able to click it, just make the visual icon so gigantic that no one can possibly miss it.
Because user interface design is always a delicate high-wire balancing act between raw usability and visual aesthetics.
Oh, okay.
If you draw a massive, thick, heavy black X in the top corner of your elegant, carefully typography-driven pop-up, it visually dominates the entire space. It draws the eye violently away from the title and the message you are trying to convey.
It looks aggressive, almost punitive.
It really does. By utilizing what we call invisible design, expanding the active invisible hitbox, while keeping the actual visual icon refined and properly scaled, we achieve both goals simultaneously.
The pop-up remains beautiful, visually balanced, and non-threatening.
But the interface generously accommodates human physical error. It forgives the user if they are walking down a bumpy street and their thumb lands slightly to the left or slightly below the exact center of the icon.
I love the idea of an interface being forgiving. It assumes the user isn't perfect and builds a safety net around their interaction.
Exactly.
But the text also warns about the absolute dark side of this. It describes the polar opposite of a forgiving design, outlining what has to be the ultimate UI sin.
Oh, this is the worst.
It says one of the worst things you can do is creating a super small X button with very low contrast. We are talking about a tiny light gray X on a white background.
Just impossible to see.
And then combining that tiny active area with deliberately disabling the ability to close the pop-up by clicking the dark background outside of it. The book literally calls this one of the most frustrating UI mistakes ever.
And let's analyze the user's emotional state in that specific moment. We already established at the very beginning of this deep dive that iPop-up is, by definition, a violent interruption.
The user is already annoyed.
They're already in a state of mild annoyance the second it appears. Now you present them with an annoyance and you demand surgical, sniper-level precision from them to dismiss it.
Right, they tap the tiny gray X and nothing happens because their thumb was off by 2 millimeters.
They intuitively tap the dark background,
Yeah.
a learned behavior they expect to work, and nothing happens because you deliberately disabled the outside click.
And what is their next logical move?
I can tell you exactly what my next move is because I've done it 100 times on my phone.
Same. I don't try to click the X a third time. I close the entire browser tab. I leave the website entirely. If your website makes me feel stupid or physically clumsy because I can't click a basic button, I'm out. I will go buy the shoes somewhere else.
Precisely. Forcing surgical precision on a user who is merely trying to dismiss an annoyance is a guaranteed foolproof way to lose them completely.
You take a moment of mild friction and escalate it into a full-blown rage quit event.
And to prevent this, there is one more spatial rule regarding the X button: the implementation of white space.
Oh yeah, the breathing room.
The design principles strictly warn against placing your X button right at the absolute edge of the pop-up window. It needs enough empty space, white space around it to be comfortably visible and clickable.
If that X is crammed perfectly into the absolute top right corner pixel, It just feels visually claustrophobic.
Furthermore, on modern mobile devices with deeply curved screens or phones wrapped in thick, bulky protective cases,
The case is right.
an X pushed to the absolute edge might actually be physically impossible for a human thumb to reach.
Okay, so if a designer follows all of this, we have successfully navigated the physical and spatial interaction. The user hasn't rage quit, they can clearly see the pop-up, they feel spatially grounded thanks to our 70% opacity theater lighting.
And our X button has a generous, forgiving 44-point invisible hitbox with plenty of white space.
Exactly. But now we must consider what the pop-up is actually saying to them. We are moving from geometry into microcopy and the philosophy of user agency.
Yes, the words matter just as much as the layout.
Chapter 18 outlines several strict parameters when it comes to designing the content of these modules. And the first foundational rule it establishes actually serves to bridge the gap between physical layout and written language.
The mobile first rule.
Right. The advice is to design your pop-ups to fit perfectly on a mobile device first, before you even think about the desktop version. It explicitly states that using the mobile-first approach helps with picking the right text widths and button sizes that will eventually work seamlessly across all devices.
It does.
But why start with the heart of smallest screen?
Because the mobile screen is the ultimate crucible for design. It burns away all the excess.
I like that.
You have an extremely limited amount of real estate to work with. If you start your design process on a massive 27-inch desktop monitor, you might be tempted to write 3 paragraphs of deeply nuanced explanation.
Accompanied by massive sweeping graphics and multiple large buttons.
Exactly. But if you then try to cram that sprawling desktop design onto a 6-inch smartphone screen, it will be an illegible, claustrophobic disaster.
It just won't fit.
Conversely, if you force yourself to be brutally concise from the beginning, if you distill your message down to its absolute bare minimum essence so it fits perfectly on a mobile screen, scaling that clean, concise design up to a desktop simply gives the elements more luxurious breathing room. It absolutely ensures clarity.
And that concept of forced conciseness leads directly into the rules on language. And the text is incredibly brutal about this.
It pulls no punches.
Use short, precise messages. Avoid using more than 2 sentences of description. 2 sentences, that's it. You do not get to write a novel explaining why you are interrupting their day.
They don't want to read a novel anyway.
But even more fascinating is how it targets the language on the buttons themselves. It says button labels must be explicit and describe the exact action that will occur. It strictly forbids using vague, non-committal terms.
The rule is don't use next or OK on the buttons.
The label should always describe the action that happens when you click.
This is a masterclass in reducing what we call cognitive friction. Consider a scenario where a user is managing their account settings, and a prompt appears that says, "Do you want to permanently delete this file from the server?"
Okay, high stakes.
If the buttons underneath that question simply say OK and cancel, you introduce a split second of dangerous ambiguity. Does clicking OK mean, yes, I understand what a file is, or does it mean, yes, I'm giving you permission to execute the deletion?
The user has to mentally map the abstract word OK back to the premise of the specific question being asked.
Right, but if they follow the rule and the button just explicitly says delete file, boom, zero ambiguity. There is absolutely no question about what happens next.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this precise language is fundamentally about user agency and informed consent. Vague buttons strip the user of their confidence.
They hesitate. They feel like they are rolling the dice and might accidentally trigger a consequence they don't want.
The guidelines show a brilliant example of a high-stakes confirmation pop-up. Do you really want to update your profile with new information? This action cannot be reverted.
And the buttons underneath do not say yes and no. They clearly and explicitly say update and cancel.
The user feels entirely in control of the software because the interface is completely transparently honest about what the next click will do.
And speaking of feeling in control, if we're going to talk about user agency, we have to talk about the trigger.
Oh boy, the triggers.
Yeah.
What actually causes a pop-up to materialize on the screen in the first place? The analysis here is incredibly aggressive on this point.
It warns, at all costs, avoid automatic pop-ups either on entry or while trying to exit the website. For a pop-up to appear, there needs to be a conscious action taken by the user.
When I read this, I immediately thought of a real-world retail scenario.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine you decide you want to buy a new shirt. You walk up to a clothing store, You
Yeah.
literally just step through the front glass door, your eyes are adjusting to the light, you haven't even looked at a single rack of clothing yet.
Right.
And instantly, before you take a second step, a salesperson jumps out from behind a mannequin, physically blocks your path, and shoves a clipboard inches from your face, aggressively demanding you sign up for their rewards program before you can browse.
That sounds like a nightmare.
That is the exact real-world equivalent of an automatic entry pop-up.
It is deeply fundamentally hostile behavior. A user navigating to your website is an expression of specific intent. They've decided they want to read your article or view your products. When you throw an automatic pop-up at them, the literal millisecond the page loads, you are loudly communicating to them. Your intent doesn't matter to us. Our business metrics matter more.
It is a complete violation of user agency.
A user must always feel like they're the one driving the vehicle, not like they're being ambushed by the dashboard. A healthy, user-centric pop-up should always be a reaction to the user's intent.
So they click a button that explicitly says, subscribe to newsletter, and then the pop-up appears to facilitate the desire they just expressed.
Exactly.
And this leads us into a massive, almost existential paradox for the modern internet, doesn't it? Because we all know exactly why websites do this.
We do.
They don't do it because they hate us. They do it because of business statistics. They do it to capture email addresses.
Yep.
So what happens when the marketing department's raw data statistics demand that the design team ambushes the user? This brings us to what has to be the most controversial type of modal discussed.
The newsletter sign-up. Yes. The great battleground of UI design.
It really is. Chapter 18 does not mince words here. It provides a blistering, scathing definition of the practice, stating plainly that pop-ups with sign-up forms are the result of statistics meeting lousy user experience.
It is such a brutal, honest takedown.
And it thoroughly explains the reality of these metrics. Because users absolutely do not expect these automatic entry sign-up pop-ups. Their default, deeply ingrained instinct is to immediately hunt for the X button and close the window before their brain even registers what the text says.
It's pure reflex at this point.
Now, the text acknowledges the cold, hard math. Yes, forcing an entry pop-up on every single visitor might yield a small single-digit percentage increase in overall subscribers.
But, and this is the absolute crux of the argument, they carry an unmeasurable negative effect on brand trust.
It points out that these aggressive tactics often convince far more users not to trust your brand than the handful of users it convinces to subscribe.
This raises an incredibly important question for any business. What is the true, holistic cost of an annoyed customer?
That's the million-dollar question.
This is the eternal grinding tension between data-driven marketing and user-centric design. Marketing teams can point to a dashboard spreadsheet and confidently say, look, our email captures went up by 2.4% when we added the aggressive entry pop-up.
That is a highly measurable, easily reportable short-term metric.
But what they cannot easily measure, and what rarely shows up on a quarterly spreadsheet, is the long-term brand equity being actively destroyed. They cannot measure the thousands of silent users who immediately close the tab in frustration.
The ones who subconsciously associated the brand name with cheap spam tactics.
And who literally never return to the site. You might successfully bully 10 people into giving you their email address, but you might permanently alienate 100 silent potential long-term customers who are repelled by the aggressive user experience.
So if I'm a business owner or I'm a designer trying to solve this problem, what is the actual alternative? If a company genuinely needs to grow their subscriber base, how do they capture emails without detonating their brand trust in the process?
The solution provided is surprisingly simple, almost old school. Stop hiding it in a pop-up.
Put the sign-up form seamlessly, natively on the page itself.
Build it into the actual flow of the content. And more importantly, it argues that the true, sustainable way to get dedicated subscribers is by providing quality content.
Make the things you publish so incredibly valuable that people are actively searching for the sign-up box so they don't miss the next update.
It feels like this gives a junior designer actual concrete ammunition.
Definitely. If a marketing director comes into a meeting and demands a full-screen, unclosable entry pop-up to capture emails, can a designer actually use this logic to push back?
Absolutely. It changes the nature of the conversation from aesthetics to business value. A designer can calmly explain that while the pop-up might capture a few emails today, it is actively degrading the trust required to make a sale tomorrow.
It forces the business to rely on the actual merit and quality of their product or content, rather than relying on the coercion of their interface.
If your content is genuinely good, An inline form at the bottom of the article will perform beautifully.
If your content is bad, an aggressive entry pop-up is essentially just putting lipstick on a pig while simultaneously annoying every guest who walks through your digital door.
Exactly.
Okay, so if the pop-up is the blunt instrument of the digital world, the thing that stops everything else dead in its tracks, what happens when you need to interrupt the user, but you absolutely cannot afford to make them lose their current progress?
This is where we transition into the close cousins of the pop-up. We need to look at overlays and action sheets.
And while they might look similar to a layman, the guidelines point out they come with entirely distinct rules, physics, and behaviors. Let's start by analyzing overlays.
Overlays share a tremendous amount of structural DNA with pop-ups. As noted, most of the good practices we just established regarding crisp readability, generous white space, and the forgiving size of active click elements apply universally to overlays as well.
Right, the basics still apply.
However, because their fundamental purpose is different, they have distinct deviations in how the user physically interacts with them. The first and most critical major difference is the interaction model regarding the background.
Okay.
Clicking outside an overlay does not close the window.
Wait, I need to stop you there. With a pop-up, we just spent 10 minutes establishing that clicking the dark background was a crucial psychological escape hatch. It was mandatory.
It was.
Why on earth would clicking the background outside an overlay not close it? Doesn't that trap the user?
That doesn't trap them, it protects them.
Protects them from what?
Because overlays are most frequently utilized for persistent, highly complex or required interactions that absolutely shouldn't be easily dismissed by a clumsy, accidental misclick.
Yeah.
Let's use a real-world example.
Okay.
Think of a complex filtering menu on a massive e-commerce site, or a highly detailed GDPR cookie consent banner that requires you to toggle specific privacy settings.
Oh, I hate those.
We all do. But these aren't just simple, okay, I saw it notifications. They require the user to perform intellectual work and make granular, multi-step choices.
Right.
Imagine a user is 3 minutes into meticulously selecting 5 different specific shoe sizes, 3 colors, and a price range in a massive filter overlay.
Yeah.
If their thumb slightly slips and grazes the background outside the box, and that action instantly closes the entire menu and wipes out all their selected progress, the level of frustration would be catastrophic.
I would throw my phone across the room.
Exactly. Therefore, because the stakes of the interaction are higher, an overlay requires a deliberate, explicit, intentional action to minimize or close it, usually via a dedicated save and close or apply filters button.
That makes total sense when you frame it around protecting the user's hard work, but because the interaction rules are completely different, the visual presentation has to shift to communicate that difference, right?
It does.
The text explicitly says, when using overlay prompts, avoid the darkening of the rest of the interface. So we are entirely throwing out that 70% opacity theater lighting rule we use for pop-ups.
Yes, no dimmed background.
But if we don't dim the lights in the background, how does the user even intuitively know that the overlay is sitting on top of the UI? Doesn't it just look like a broken, messy web page with floating elements?
If executed poorly, yes. This is why you need a crystal clear visual indicator to establish the Z-axis without dimming the background. The recommendation is to use a heavily refined, subtle drop shadow or a distinctly contrasting visual border.
So the shadow does the heavy lifting.
The shadow acts exactly as it did for the pop-up, creating that physical illusion of depth, telling the brain, this is floating closer to you. But it accomplishes this without the aggressive, focus-forcing dimming of the background lights.
It communicates a very specific spatial message to the user. Here is a dedicated panel of complex tools resting lightly on top of your workspace. But your primary workspace is still fully lit, fully active, and right where you left it.
That's exactly it.
And there is a very specific, almost shocking physical constraint given for overlays when they are used on desktop environments.
With constraint.
Yes. It states, if you're designing an overlay for desktop use, remember to keep your content between 600 and 800 pixels wide. You can leave the sides empty, but don't stretch the content to fit your screen above 800 pixels.
That's a hard limit.
It goes on to explicitly warn that long lines of text are especially challenging to read. But I have to push back on this a bit.
Let's hear it.
If I am a designer and I know my user has massive, beautiful 32-inch curved ultra-wide monitor. Shouldn't I take advantage of all that glorious digital real estate? Why on earth would I cramp my text into a tiny, narrow 800-pixel column floating awkwardly in the middle of a massive screen?
Because human biology doesn't scale up just because our monitors got bigger.
Wait, really?
Truly, this 600 to 800 pixel cap is a golden rule rooted deeply in the physical mechanical psychology of how the human eye actually reads text.
Okay, break that down for me.
Our eyes do not smoothly glide across a sentence like a car on a highway. They read text by moving in rapid, jerky little jumps called saccades, followed by microsecond pauses where the brain processes the word, called fixations.
Saccades and fixations.
Yes. When a line of text is designed to be too long, say, stretching entirely across a massive 27-inch monitor, it requires significant, sustained physical effort from the tiny muscles in the eye to track the line all the way to the far right edge.
Oh, I see.
But more importantly, when the eye finally reaches the end of that massively long line, it has to perform a physiological action called a return sweep.
Going back to the left side.
It'd have to snap all the way back to the far left side of the screen and perfectly acquire the beginning of the very next line down.
And if the line is too long?
If the line is too long, the angle of the return sweep is too shallow, and the eye frequently gets lost. It skips a line, or it frustratingly rereads the exact same line it just finished.
Oh, wow. So you're saying that reading wide text actually causes physical exhaustion. You literally have to move your entire neck and head to read a single paragraph on an ultra-wide monitor.
Exactly. It induces profound cognitive and physical strain. By hard capping the overlay width between strictly 600 and 800 pixels, you are artificially creating an optimal, biologically comfortable reading measure.
Which generally equates to about 50 to 75 characters per line of text.
Within this narrow column, the eye can easily track the words. The return sweep to the next line is incredibly short and highly accurate, and cognitive strain is entirely minimized.
So even if you have a massive screen, restricting the text block to a comfortable, readable central column is a profound act of user empathy.
It really is.
There's another fascinating point about overlays here, specifically regarding visual consistency, because overlays are so frequently used for things like mandatory third-party cookie prompts or legal disclaimers.
All right, the stuff you have to include.
The text drops a stern warning. If you're using a generic overlay, the spacings, fonts, and buttons can be very inconsistent with the rest of your UI.
Oh, this happens all the time.
And it implies that if your overlay looks completely different from your main website, the user might actually think it came from a malicious external source and grow highly suspicious.
It triggers an instinctual digital stranger danger response. Imagine you are comfortably browsing a sleek, highly modern website. It features gorgeous minimalist typography, plenty of white space, and soft, elegant blue buttons.
Sounds nice.
Suddenly, a harsh, blocky, poorly formatted overlay slams onto the screen featuring Times New Roman text, cramped spacing, and bright red 1990s-style 3D buttons.
Oh, yuck. I would immediately think I got a virus.
Your brain immediately flags that visual anomaly as a threat. It looks like malware. It looks like a virus has hijacked your browser.
Even if it's completely safe.
Even if it is just a completely harmless, generic, out-of-the-box cookie plugin that a lazy developer installed without styling it. That visual inconsistency instantly shatters the hard-earned brand trust we spent so much time discussing earlier.
That makes total sense. Every single element that appears on your domain, even the annoying, legally mandated requirements, must look like it natively belongs to your brand's visual language.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we've solved the physical and spatial problem for desktop screens by hard capping overlay widths to respect human eye biology.
We have.
But that entire philosophy, having plenty of horizontal space to leave the sides empty, completely falls apart the literal second a user pulls their smartphone out of their pocket.
You don't have 800 pixels on a phone.
You simply do not have the horizontal space to play with. The physical constraints force a complete architectural redesign of how we handle interruptions, which brings us perfectly to the final tool in our categorized toolkit, action sheets.
My personal favorite.
What fundamentally makes an action sheet different from just cramming a pop-up onto a mobile screen?
An action sheet is a uniquely mobile native paradigm. Rather than materializing right in the dead center of the screen and blocking the core visual field like a pop-up, an action sheet typically manifests as a menu of options that rises up from the absolute bottom edge of the mobile screen.
Because the origin point is different, the entire interaction model completely shifts to match the physical ergonomics of holding a phone.
Exactly. First, as the guidelines specifically note, Action sheets usually entirely discard the concept of the top right X button.
Why is that?
Reaching for the top right corner of a modern, massive smartphone requires a user to awkwardly shift their grip, risking dropping the device.
The thumb gymnastics.
Right. Instead, action sheets feature a massive dedicated cancel action anchored at the very bottom of the sheet, right where the user's thumb is already naturally resting.
Or, leaning even further into intuitive mobile physics, the user can simply place their thumb on the sheet and physically swipe the entire menu downwards off the screen to dismiss it.
I realize I use these 100 times a day on my phone without even thinking about it. When you're looking at a photo and you tap the share icon, and that entire menu slides up from the bottom, showing your recent contacts and your messaging apps.
That is exactly an action sheet.
And regarding how they physically enter the screen, there is a crucial rule highlighted here. It states, one of the essential features of action sheets is the transition that they use to appear. They should visibly slide in from the bottom so the user understands it's possible to slide or swipe them back down.
That is a phenomenal example of how motion is used as communication. That slide-up animation is absolutely not just for visual flair or making the app look futuristic. It is a critical functional affordance.
Define affordance for the listener.
In UI design, an affordance is a visual or physical characteristic that implicitly communicates how an object can be used. When a standard pop-up simply magically materializes out of thin air in the center of the screen via a simple fade-in, there is zero spatial logic to how you might physically dismiss it.
It has no physical origin, so you don't know where to send it back to. You are entirely reliant on hunting for the X.
But when an action sheet physically, visibly slides up from the bottom edge of the glass, it creates a powerful physical metaphor in the user's subconscious.
The brain tracks the motion and registers this digital object physically originated from the bottom edge. Therefore, I can physically push it back down to that same edge to get rid of it. It maps digital pixels to real-world physical logic.
And because action sheets have this unique property of being physically anchored to the bottom edge, the analysis points out an incredible capability they have that pop-ups completely lack.
Expanding overlays and states.
Yes. It details how an action sheet doesn't have to just be a static box. It can dynamically change its size.
It says that a well-designed action sheet can initially slide up just a little bit, maybe taking up the bottom third of the screen, to show just the most popular high-priority actions.
But if the user wants more options, they can physically place their thumb on the top edge of the sheet and drag it further up the screen, expanding it to reveal a secondary larger state with more complex menus.
The expanding action sheet is one of the most elegant, complex solutions to the mobile screen real estate problem. It operates on the principle of progressive disclosure.
Progressive disclosure. Show me just what I need right now.
Exactly. You only show the user exactly what they are statistically most likely to need right now, saving space and reducing cognitive overload. But you provide a frictionless, physical mechanism dragging up to access the full suite of tools if they need them.
That's brilliant.
However, the guidelines issue a stark warning for designers here. If you choose to build a custom expanding action sheet, you cannot just design the beginning and the end. You must meticulously design every single state.
Because of the transition.
Yes. You must design the collapsed state, the half-expanded state, the fully expanded full-screen state, and the fluid animations that connect all of them. If the physics feel even slightly off, or if the text overlaps weirdly halfway through the drag, the physical illusion completely breaks, and the user feels like the app is glitching.
So what does this all mean? If I had to take a step back and synthesize all of these incredibly specific, mathematically precise pixel rules, the deep psychological lighting choices, the unyielding animation requirements, and the biological limits on font width into a single, cohesive concept, I think it all comes down to one word.
Predictability.
Predictability. Good UI design, at its absolute core, is simply the act of ensuring that the digital world behaves with the exact same reliability and predictability as the physical world we evolved in.
If a drawer slides up, it should slide down.
If I'm looking at a piece of paper, the text shouldn't suddenly span 3 feet wide and hurt my neck to read. If I want to close a box, the button to close it shouldn't be a microscopic dot that demands a sniper's precision to tap.
Predictability is the bedrock of trust. Predictability breeds deep cognitive comfort, and comfort breeds brand trust.
When a digital interface behaves completely predictably, the user entirely stops thinking about how to use the tool and is able to focus 100% of their cognitive energy on what they are actually trying to accomplish: buying the shoes, reading the article, managing their data.
When you break that predictability, when you ambush them with automatic entry pop-ups, when you confuse them with vague, non-committal button language, or when you frustrate them with tiny, mathematically unforgiving click targets, you aggressively force the user to stop thinking about their goal and start thinking about your interface.
And the absolute second the user is thinking about your interface, you have lost their focus on your product.
You've lost them.
Let's bring all these incredible threads together to land the plane. Today, we took a massive, comprehensive deep dive into the absolute last resorts of digital interface design.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We learned the stringent mathematical, visual, and psychological rules of top-level prompts. We clearly defined the distinct functional differences between the desktop-friendly pop-up, the persistent progress-protecting overlay, and the physically intuitive mobile-native action sheet.
We learned the biology behind why a good X button desperately needs a generous 44-point invisible hitbox to forgive human error.
We learned that using 70% opacity in a background overlay isn't an aesthetic choice, but rather the perfect psychological tether to keep a user from feeling kidnapped or lost.
And perhaps most importantly for anyone working in business or marketing, we learned that fighting back against aggressive automatic entry pop-ups isn't just about making things look pretty for a portfolio.
It is fundamentally about protecting the measurable trust and long-term financial equity of your brand against short-sighted, data-obsessed statistics.
And if we have done our job correctly today, from this day forward, you will quite literally never look at a digital screen or a website the same way again.
It is a one-way door. You are going to start noticing absolutely everything. The very next time you are browsing on your phone and a newsletter prompt jumps out and ambushes you, you are instantly going to look for the placement of that X button.
You are going to consciously notice if the background is completely, terrifyingly blacked out, or if you can still safely read the blurred article behind it.
You're going to notice if the lines of text in a complex cookie consent form are agonizingly wide, forcing your eyes to painfully scan back and forth. You are no longer just a passive consumer of the internet. You are now armed with the exact psychological and geometric reasons why badly designed sites make you feel so incredibly frustrated.
But before we officially sign off, all of this meticulous analysis raises a final, perhaps somewhat unsettling thought for you to mull over the next time you browse.
Leave them with something to think about.
We just spent this entire session exhaustively discussing how designers can perfectly engineer these interruptions to mitigate human frustration. We talked about invisible hitboxes, perfect drop shadows, and exact phrasing. But if our default, deeply trained human reaction to any pop-up, no matter how beautifully designed, no matter how perfectly shadowed, no matter how politely worded, is an instinctual, split-second, desperate search for the X button before our brain even registers the title.
Oh, wow.
Are we simply training an entire generation of users to become completely permanently blind to the very information we are so desperately trying to highlight?
That is a genuinely terrifying thought for any designer or developer to wrestle with. The perfectly designed, mathematically flawless fire alarm that everyone has simply learned to instinctively, unconsciously mute.
Something to think about.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the interfaces around you, keep fighting for user agency in your own projects, and we will see you next time.